welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I was 3 hours into my shift at the Blackwater Communications Center when the transmission came through. The facility hummed with its usual mechanical symphony: air recyclers, server fans, the distant thrum of the backup generators buried 4 levels down in the hardened bunker complex. Standard overnight monitoring duty, tracking satellite feeds and military frequencies across the northwestern sector from our position 30 miles outside Denver. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Channel 7 had been carrying routine weather updates from Peterson Air Force Base, but at 0347 hours, it went dead. Not static, not interference, complete radio silence. I adjusted my headset and switched to backup frequencies, running through the standard checklist. Control, this is Operator Axton. I've got a dead channel on frequency 7. Requesting status check. Dorian's voice crackled through my earpiece from the command center above. Copy that, Axton. We're seeing the same thing. Probably another solar flare screwing with the satellites. Keep monitoring. I should have left it at that. Should have logged the outage and moved on to the next frequency. But something about the silence felt wrong. Too clean, too deliberate. In 12 years of communications work, I'd heard every type of interference imaginable. This wasn't natural. I was reaching for my coffee when the new signal came through. Not on Channel 7, that remained dead. This was broadcasting across multiple frequencies simultaneously, a technique that required significant coordination and technical capability. The voice was male, professional, speaking with the measured cadence of military personnel. This is a priority transmission to all listening stations. Unknown Faction Command declares immediate cessation of recognized governmental authority. Sovereignty protocols are hereby terminated. Nuclear strike authorization confirmed. This is not a drill. I felt my hand freeze halfway to the coffee cup. The transmission continued, providing specific coordinates, authentication codes, and what sounded like legitimate military terminology. But Unknown Faction Command wasn't in any of our databases. No recognized military organization used that designation. I started recording immediately, my fingers moving across the console while my mind raced through possibilities. Hoax transmission was the most likely. We dealt with them before, usually from amateur radio operators or foreign intelligence services testing our response times. But this felt different. The voice carried genuine authority, and the technical sophistication required to broadcast across multiple frequencies simultaneously suggested serious resources and military-grade equipment. The transmission ended with a timestamp and repetition schedule, then cut to static. I ran the recording back, listening for any telltale signs of audio manipulation or foreign accents. Nothing stood out immediately, but my training kicked in. I began tracing the signal origin, working through our triangulation systems while simultaneously running the authentication codes through our military verification database. Axton, report. Dorian's voice cut through my concentration. I'm seeing unusual activity on your board. Sir, I've got a priority transmission claiming nuclear strike authorization, broadcasting across multiple frequencies. I'm running traces now. Pause. Send it up here. Now, I uploaded the recording to the command center and continued my analysis. The signal strength suggested a source within approximately 50 miles of our location, close enough to be a real threat, but also close enough to be a deliberate provocation. The thought made my stomach tighten. My console chimed with an incoming message. Not through official channels, this was coming through the facility's internal network, bypassing all standard security protocols. The message was brief. Axton need to see you.
Urgent.
Sublevel 3 Intel Section.
Elle.
Leora, my ex-partner from the intelligence division, now working classified assignments 3 clearance levels above mine. We'd ended things 6 months ago when her security clearance got upgraded and mine stayed the same. Different worlds, different access levels, different futures. But she was still the best intelligence analyst I'd ever worked with, and the only person I trusted completely in this facility. I hesitated, staring at the message. Protocol dictated I report the internal network breach immediately. But Leora wouldn't contact me through unauthorized channels unless something was seriously wrong. The timing couldn't be coincidental, not with a nuclear threat transmission coming through simultaneously. My workstation displayed 3 different alert screens. The signal trace was narrowing down coordinates to somewhere within a 40-mile radius of our location. The frequency analysis was showing anomalous patterns consistent with military-grade transmission equipment, and the authentication codes from the transmission were triggering automated verification protocols that kept returning classification pending, instead of the usual invalid 4 hoax transmissions. I looked up at the command center through the reinforced glass. Dorian was hunched over his console, probably coordinating with higher command about the transmission. Standard procedure would be to classify it as a hoax until proven otherwise, then wait for official verification from Pentagon channels. That process could take hours, but if this was real, hours might be too long. I grabbed my security badge and headed for the door, pausing only to lock my workstation. The facility's corridors were dimly lit for night shift operations, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the reinforced concrete walls. Each step echoed in the narrow space, the sound swallowed by the constant hum of ventilation systems that kept the underground complex habitable. The intelligence section was 3 levels down, accessible only through a series of secured checkpoints and biometric scanners. I'd visited the area exactly once during my facility orientation, and never since. As I approached the first checkpoint, my badge scanner beeped softly. Access denied. Insufficient clearance level. I was about to turn back when the security door clicked open. Leora stood in the doorway, her face pale in the artificial lighting. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually neat appearance disheveled and strained. Dark circles under her eyes, coffee stains on her shirt, the telltale signs of someone who'd been working around the clock on something urgent. "Thank God you got my message," she said, pulling me into the secure area. "We need to talk about that transmission you just received." My blood went cold. "How do you know about?" "Because I've been tracking this group for 3 months. They're not unknown to us, Axton. They're very, very known. And if they just broadcast nuclear strike authorization using legitimate military codes, we're already too late to stop the first phase." The security door sealed behind us with a soft hiss, cutting off my retreat. In the distance, I could hear alarms beginning to sound. Not the facility's standard emergency system, but something deeper, more urgent. The kind of alarm that meant the automated threat assessment system had upgraded our status from monitoring to imminent danger. Leora was already moving toward her workstation, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards. "I need you to help me trace that transmission. Official channels are compromised, and Dorian's going to follow protocol even if it kills us all." I stood frozen in the doorway, caught between my duty to report back to the command center and the growing certainty that everything I thought I knew about our security was wrong. The alarms were getting louder, and somewhere in the facility's depths, I could hear the distinctive whine of emergency systems cycling online. Backup power, air filtration, and the massive blast doors that could seal us in completely. Leora, what exactly are we dealing with here? She turned from her console, her eyes reflecting the glow of multiple screens showing satellite feeds, communication intercepts, and threat assessment data. A faction that's been infiltrating military communications for months. They have legitimate codes, real equipment, and the capability to coordinate multiple strike sites simultaneously. The transmission you received? That was just the beginning. The facility shuddered slightly, not from any external impact, but from the massive blast doors sealing us in. Lockdown protocol had been initiated, which meant either Dorian had classified the threat as credible or something else had triggered the automatic systems. Either way, we were now trapped in a hardened bunker complex with limited air supply and no way out until the threat was resolved or the lockdown timer expired in 72 hours. How long do we have? I asked, though I already suspected I didn't want to know the answer. According to their timeline, about 4 hours until the first detonation. But Axton, she paused, her expression growing even more grave. I don't think they're planning to start with somewhere far away. I think they're planning to start here. The words hit me like a physical blow. Our facility wasn't just a communications center. It was a critical node in the National Defense Network, coordinating military communications across the entire western United States. If you wanted to cripple the country's ability to respond to a nuclear attack, this would be one of the primary targets. Why? I managed to ask. Why would they target us first? Because, Leora said, pulling up a map on her screen that showed dozens of red dots scattered across the country. We're not the target. We're the first domino. Take out communications and the rest of the strikes happen in darkness. No coordination, no response, no warning. The red dots pulsed ominously on the screen, each one representing a potential nuclear detonation. And in the center of it all, a larger red dot marked our exact location. We were about to become ground zero. I barely had time to process the implications of that first transmission before the situation exploded across every frequency we monitored. The communications bay erupted into chaos as identical messages began flooding in from stations worldwide. London, Tokyo, Frankfurt, Sydney. Each one carried the same clinical tone, the same impossible authority. Sovereignty ended. Nuclear authorization confirmed. Target packages distributed. The timestamp data showed they'd all been transmitted simultaneously, despite originating from different continents. The metallic taste in my mouth grew stronger as I watched Myra's fingers dance across her workstation, her face pale in the blue glow of multiple screens. Axton, these aren't random broadcasts, she said, her voice tight with concentration. The transmission patterns are synchronized to the microsecond. Someone's coordinating this globally. Commander Dorian's voice cut through the din from the central command platform. Lock down all external communications. No one gets in or out until we understand what we're dealing with. His weathered face showed the strain of 30 years in crisis management. But I caught something else in his expression. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders as I turned back to my console. The electromagnetic interference was getting worse, causing static to creep into even our hardened military frequencies. My skin tingled with each pulse of whatever was disrupting our systems, and I noticed the fluorescent lights flickering in rhythm with the interference. Sir, with respect, isolation might be exactly what they want, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the growing dread in my chest. If this unknown faction has the capability to coordinate globally, Cutting ourselves off could leave us blind to their next move. Dorian's jaw tightened. My orders are clear, specialist. We follow protocol. No exceptions. But protocol hadn't prepared us for this. I glanced toward the intelligence section where Leora worked, separated from the main communications floor by reinforced glass. Even from here, I could see the tension in her posture as she hunched over classified terminals. We hadn't spoken directly since the divorce 6 months ago, but I knew that look. She was connecting dots that others couldn't see. The next wave of transmissions came at 14:47 hours, exactly 37 minutes after the first. This time they included technical specifications that made my blood run cold. Yield calculations, targeting vectors, and countdown sequences that looked disturbingly authentic. Myra's hands shook as she cross-referenced the data with our nuclear response protocols, her engineering background making her the only one who could verify their legitimacy. "These aren't threats," she whispered, loud enough for only me to hear. "These are operational orders. Someone's using our own command structure against us." I watched her pull up classified nuclear authentication codes on her secondary screen, her security clearance granting access to systems most of us couldn't even see. The color drained from her face as she compared them to the transmission data, her breath coming in short gasps. "Axton, 17 of these codes are legitimate, current, authorized, and properly encrypted. They're not just mimicking our systems, they're using them." The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the unknown faction had access to authentic nuclear command codes, they weren't external terrorists or foreign agents. They were inside our own systems, using our own weapons against us. The facility's emergency lighting kicked in as the main power grid fluctuated, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. I felt sweat beading on my forehead despite the climate control, and the tingling sensation in my skin intensified. Whatever was causing the electromagnetic interference was getting stronger. "Commander," I called out, trying to keep desperation from my voice. "We need to contact NORAD Strategic Command, anyone who can verify these codes. If this faction has infiltrated our authentication systems." "Negative." Dorian cut me off. "Lockdown means lockdown. We don't break radio silence until we know what we're dealing with." But that's exactly what worried me. The longer we waited, the more organized this unknown faction became. Each new transmission showed increasing sophistication, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our isolation was playing directly into their hands. I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Moving to a secure terminal in the back corner of the communications bay, I began quietly establishing a back-channel communication link using old emergency frequencies that predated our current protocols. The equipment was older, more analog, potentially less vulnerable to whatever was causing our interference. If Dorian wanted to follow procedure, fine. But I wouldn't sit here blind while potential nuclear strikes were being coordinated around us. The static in my earpiece suddenly cleared, and I heard something that made my heart stop. A voice, familiar, professional, speaking in the same measured tone as the unknown faction transmissions. "Phase 2 initiated. Target verification complete. Commence countdown sequence." The transmission was coming from inside our facility, routing through our own internal communication system. I spun around to scan the communications bay, trying to identify the source. But everyone was focused on their own stations, their own growing panic. 23 personnel, all with proper clearance, all following protocol. The voice had come from someone in this room, and whoever had spoken was still among us, watching our every move. My hands trembled as I reached for the intercom switch, then stopped. If I announced what I'd heard, I'd tip off whoever was working with the unknown faction. But staying silent meant potentially letting them complete whatever Phase 2 entailed. Dorian's lockdown wasn't protecting us. It was trapping us inside with the enemy, giving them time to work without outside interference. The unknown faction hadn't just infiltrated our systems. They'd infiltrated our people. The metallic taste in my mouth turned bitter as I realized the terrible truth. We weren't just monitoring a nuclear threat. We were sitting in ground zero of whatever was coming next, and our own protocols were being used to ensure we couldn't escape or warn anyone else. The unknown faction had planned this perfectly. Isolation, confusion, and infiltration all wrapped in the guise of proper military procedure. Outside, the first sirens began to wail. Too late, I thought. Whatever Phase 2 was, it had already begun. The secure briefing room felt smaller than usual as Dorian paced behind the metal table, his face drawn with exhaustion. 18 hours since the first transmission, and we still had no clear answers. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, power fluctuations that had started 6 hours ago. Another sign that our facility systems were being pushed beyond their limits. "Axton, I need you to focus," Dorian said, stopping his pacing to face me directly. "These global transmissions are causing mass panic. 3 cities have initiated emergency evacuations. The Joint Chiefs are demanding answers we don't have." I kept my attention on the communication array, fine-tuning the frequency analyzer Mira had rigged up during the night shift. The static patterns were becoming more complex, almost like a digital fingerprint evolving in real time. "Sir, with respect, it's not panic. The authentication codes embedded in these transmissions match our current rotation schedule." "Are probably stolen," Dorian interrupted. "We've had security breaches before." The heavy door to the briefing room hissed open, and Leora entered carrying a sealed folder marked with classification levels I hadn't seen since my clearance upgrade 2 years ago. Her expression was grim, and she avoided my eyes as she approached Dorian's desk. "Commander, I need to brief you on Operation Blackout," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "Both of you." Dorian's jaw tightened. "Leora, we've been through this. Your intelligence assessments suggested a low probability. The probability changed 6 months ago." She opened the folder, revealing satellite photos and communication intercepts. "The faction calling itself Sovereignty's End isn't unknown to us. We've been tracking them since the Prague incident last winter." My blood went cold. Prague had been classified as a cybersecurity exercise gone wrong, but the details were kept from communications personnel. "What Prague incident?" Leora finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes during our 3 years of partnership. Genuine fear. A coordinated infiltration of NATO's nuclear command structure. It lasted 17 minutes before they withdrew voluntarily, but they proved they could access our most secure systems without triggering a single alert. She spread the photos across the table. Military installations, communication towers, and what looked like maintenance facilities. "They're not terrorists, Axton. They're former military, specialists from at least 4 different nations. Engineers, communication experts, nuclear technicians who were quietly forced out during the last round of budget cuts." "That's impossible," Dorian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The screening protocols were circumvented by people who helped design them." Leora pulled out a communication transcript. "This is from the Prague attack. Same linguistic patterns, same technical terminology as today's transmissions." I studied the transcript, my training automatically parsing the technical language. The communication protocols were flawless military precision with an undertone of something else. Bitter professionalism. They're using our own systems against us, but they know them intimately. More than that, Leora continued, they've been recruiting from within. Personnel who feel betrayed by post-war treaty limitations, budget cuts, early retirements. People with legitimate grievances and dangerous skills. Dorian slammed his palm on the table. Why wasn't I informed of this threat assessment? Because you weren't supposed to be a primary target. Leora's voice was barely above a whisper. This facility was considered low priority. We thought they were focused on strategic command centers and missile silos. Myra's voice crackled through the intercom. Axton, you need to see this. The signal analysis just revealed something. I activated the room's communication panel. What did you find? The transmission source isn't external. It's coming from within our own network infrastructure. Specifically, from a series of relay stations that were supposedly taken offline for routine maintenance 3 days ago. The room fell silent. Dorian's face went pale as the implications sank in. Are you saying? I'm saying someone has been using our maintenance schedules to install unauthorized equipment, Myra's voice continued. The unknown faction isn't broadcasting from some remote location. They're using our own facilities as relay points. I felt the pieces clicking into place with terrifying clarity. That's why the authentication codes are legitimate. They're not stolen. They're being generated by our own systems, probably by someone with legitimate access. Leora nodded grimly. Sovereignty's End has been preparing for this for months. They've positioned themselves inside our communication network, waiting for the right moment to declare our current command structure illegitimate. But the nuclear strike threat, Dorian began, is real, I finished. If they can access our communication systems with this level of sophistication, they can potentially access our launch protocols. Maybe not directly, but they could certainly disrupt our ability to stop someone else who could. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed dim. Through the reinforced windows, I could see the external communication array rotating slowly, its massive dish turning toward coordinates that weren't on any of our scheduled transmission logs. Sir, I said, my training overriding my growing panic. We need to assume that every communication channel is compromised. Standard protocols won't work. Dorian looked between Leora and me, his authority wavering in the face of a threat he'd never been trained to handle. What are you suggesting? We go dark, I said. Cut all external communications, run on internal power only, and manually verify every system in this facility. That would leave us isolated, Dorian protested. We'd have no way to coordinate with higher command. Higher command might be the problem, Leora said quietly. If Sovereignty's End has infiltrated multiple facilities, then any orders we receive could be compromised. The communication panel suddenly activated on its own, displaying a new message in the same professional format as before. Facility 7 Alpha, your isolation protocols are noted and appreciated. Sovereignty's End commends your tactical awareness during this transition period. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. They're not just monitoring us. They're anticipating our responses. Dorian's military bearing finally cracked. Jesus Christ, Axton. What do we do? For the first time in 18 hours, I felt a cold clarity cutting through the confusion. We do our job, sir. We protect the people who are counting on us, even if it means we can't trust the normal chain of command. I turned to Leora. You said they've been recruiting from within. Are you certain there are no Sovereignty's End operatives in this facility? She hesitated just long enough to make my heart sink. I can't be certain of anything anymore. The recruitment pattern suggests they target people with legitimate grievances, and everyone here has been passed over for promotion or had their projects canceled in the last 2 years. The lights went out completely, plunging us into emergency lighting. In the red glow, I could see the weight of impossible command settling on Dorian's shoulders, along with the terrible realization that the enemy wasn't just at our gates. They were already inside, and they knew us better than we knew ourselves. The radar screen's green sweep painted a nightmare in phosphorescent dots. I stared at the blip that shouldn't exist, a missile signature moving at Mach 3, bearing 285 degrees, altitude dropping from 80,000 feet. The computer's voice cut through the bunker's stale air with mechanical precision. Incoming ballistic missile. Impact in 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Jesus Christ, Mira whispered from her console, fingers dancing across seismic monitoring equipment. The signature's real. Warhead separation confirmed. This isn't a drill, Axton. Dorian stood frozen behind his command desk, face pale as parchment. 6 hours ago, he dismissed the unknown faction's transmission as an elaborate hoax. Now reality was streaking toward us at 1,800 miles per hour, and his protocol-driven mind was shattering like glass. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the ice in my veins, "we need to initiate emergency evacuation procedures. Now." He didn't respond, just stared at the countdown timer I jerry-rigged from spare parts. 1342, 1341, 1340. The red numbers carved themselves into my retinas with each pulse. "Commander Dorian." Leora's voice cracked like a whip. She'd been monitoring communication frequencies, trying to raise anyone beyond our 30-mile dead zone. "The missile's targeting coordinates. They're not random. Someone fed them our exact location." That broke through his paralysis. "Impossible. This facility is classified beyond." "Beyond what?" I grabbed his shoulders, feeling the tremor running through his frame. "Beyond the same classification level as the authentication codes in that transmission. The ones you insisted were fake." The bunker's emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in hellish red. Somewhere above us, the automated systems were sealing blast doors and activating radiation filters. Too little, too late. This place was built to withstand a near miss, not a direct hit. "Evacuation protocols are locked," Mira reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The system's been compromised. Emergency exits are sealed, and the automated lockdown can't be overridden from these terminals." I felt the walls closing in, but forced myself to think. 12 minutes. The nearest hardened shelter was the Metro 7 station, 8 miles northeast through the abandoned subway system. Without the surface transport that was now sealed away, we had one option. "The maintenance tunnels," I said, remembering the facility blueprints I'd memorized during security training. "They connect to the old Metro 7 line. If we can reach the junction, we can follow the tracks to the hardened station." Those tunnels were partially sealed after the 2019 contamination incident, Dorian interrupted, finally finding his voice. "The radiation levels may still are preferable to nuclear incineration," I finished. "Mira, what's the fallout projection if we stay?" She pulled up the modeling software, her hands shaking as she input the warhead's estimated yield based on the radar signature. 15 kiloton device. Ground zero will be right here. Primary radiation zone extends 12 miles in all directions. Anyone within 8 miles has maybe 30 minutes before lethal exposure. The math was simple and terrible. We had 11 minutes to travel 8 miles through potentially contaminated tunnels, hoping to reach the hardened Metro 7 station before the shockwave turned the earth above into molten glass. "There's something else," Leora said quietly. She'd been monitoring the faction's frequency, listening to their coded transmissions since the initial alert. They're not done. This strike, it's a test. They're using us to gauge response time, emergency protocols, communication breakdown patterns. A test for what? Dorian demanded. Larger targets, major cities, military installations. She met my eyes, and I saw the same cold calculation there that I felt in my gut. I've been tracking similar transmission patterns across 17 other facilities. We're not just trying to survive. We're the only ones who can warn the others about what's coming next. The weight of it hit me like a physical blow. Even if we escaped, even if we reached Metro 7, we'd be sitting in a radioactive wasteland while the unknown faction refined their methodology for striking 17 other facilities. Unless someone stopped them. The emergency broadcast array, I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. The one at Metro 7. It's hardened against EMP, designed to function as a backup communication hub after a nuclear event. After the blast? Mira stared at me like I'd suggested juggling plutonium. Axton, the radiation exposure alone will kill us slowly instead of instantly. I was already moving, grabbing the emergency radio kit from its wall mount. But if we can warn the other 17 facilities, maybe save a few million lives, the array will be destroyed, Dorian said flatly. Direct hit, 15 kilotons. There won't be anything left. Not the main array here. The backup relay station at Metro 7, 8 miles east. It's designed to survive and auto-deploy after a nuclear event. I'd read about it in the classified technical manuals, never imagining I'd need that knowledge. If we can reach it within 6 hours of detonation, 6 hours, Leora laughed bitterly. In a radioactive hellscape, we'd need radiation suits, transportation, and a death wish. We have 2 of those things, I said, pointing to the emergency equipment locker. And I'm working on the 3rd. The countdown read 9:23. Time was bleeding away like water through a sieve. Sir, I said to Dorian, I need your authorization to access the emergency protocols. The real ones, not the sanitized version they showed us in training. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the weight of command crushing down on him. He'd followed every rule, trusted every system, and now faced the consequences of a world where rules meant nothing and systems could be corrupted by an unknown faction with legitimate military codes. Authorization granted, he said quietly. Whatever you need. I interfaced with the bunker's central computer, using Dorian's command codes to access protocols I'd only heard whispered about in classified briefings. Emergency asset deployment, post-nuclear communication procedures, continuity of government operations. There, I said, finding what I needed. Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Autonomous Communication Relay Deployment. If we can trigger it manually from Metro 7, it requires 2-person authentication, Mira read over my shoulder. Command authority and technical specialist, plus a third-party intelligence verification. That's Dorian, me, and Leora, I said. But we have to do it from the relay station itself. After the blast, the silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, the missile was 6 minutes away and closing fast. Inside, we faced a choice that would define not just our survival, but the fate of everyone the unknown faction planned to target next. The maintenance tunnels, Dorian said finally. If we can reach them before impact. I've been monitoring the tunnel sensors remotely, Mira interrupted. Radiation levels are elevated but not immediately lethal. The 2019 contamination incident was contained to the first half-mile. We might have a chance if we move fast. Might, Leora repeated. That's what we're betting our lives on. I checked my watch. For 47. The point of no return was racing toward us faster than thought itself. Better than betting them on staying here, I said, shouldering the emergency pack. Move, we ran. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as I stared at the main display. 3 more facilities had gone dark in the past hour: Colorado Springs, Norfolk, and now Offutt. Each blackout followed the same pattern. Authentic strike warnings, communication cutoffs, then silence. The unknown faction wasn't just making threats anymore. They were systematically dismantling our nuclear command structure from the inside. Axton, you need to see this. Leora's voice cracked as she hunched over her intelligence terminal. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she pulled up classified files I'd never seen before. I've been tracking this faction for 8 months. Operation Blackout. It started as a joint investigation between CIA and NSA. I moved behind her workstation, feeling the weight of every decision that had led us here. The facility's backup power hummed ominously, reminding me that we were operating on borrowed time. 8 months? Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't cleared for it. Hell, half the people investigating it weren't cleared for the full scope. She opened a file marked with classification levels that made my stomach drop. The unknown faction isn't foreign, Axton. They're us. Rogue elements from Strategic Command, working with contractors who built our communication systems. The display showed organizational charts, financial records, and communication intercepts. Names I recognized, officers I'd worked with, contractors who'd installed our equipment. The scope was staggering. How many are compromised? We estimate 30 to 40 personnel across 6 facilities. They've been positioning themselves for years, waiting for the right moment. Leora's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more evidence. The sovereignty-ended phrase is a coded message. They're telling sleeper agents that Phase 3 is active. A new alarm pierced the air, different from the evacuation sirens. This one was sharp, urgent, mechanical. I spun toward the communications array where Mira was frantically working, her face pale in the monitor glow. Axton. Myra's voice was barely audible over the alarm. I've got a trace on the transmission source, but there's a problem. The signal is coming from inside our own network infrastructure. Someone's been using our own satellites to coordinate the strikes. I felt the blood drain from my face. Can you isolate it? I'm trying, but whoever set this up knew our systems better than we do. They've created backdoors in the firmware itself. Myra's hands moved desperately across her controls. I can trace the origin point, but I'll need physical access to the primary server room. And Axton. She paused, meeting my eyes. The room is in the restricted section, past the radiation-sealed doors. The weight of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. The restricted section had been sealed after the first strike alert, following protocol for containing potential contamination. Anyone who went in there would be exposed to whatever radiation might be leaking from the damaged systems. More importantly, the automated locks wouldn't open again until the all-clear signal, which might never come. I'll go, I said immediately, but Mira shook her head. You don't understand the technical requirements. I need to physically access the server cores, trace the modified firmware, and implement a patch that'll cut off their access. It's not just about getting there. It's about understanding what they've done to our systems. Dorian's voice cut through our argument. Neither of you is going anywhere. I'm not sending people into a potentially irradiated zone based on hunches and conspiracy theories. He stood behind us, still clinging to protocol even as everything fell apart around us. We follow procedure. We wait for official word from Washington. Washington isn't responding, Dorian. I turned to face him, anger finally boiling over. How many more facilities need to go dark before you accept that the chain of command is compromised? My orders are clear. Your orders are from the same people who might be behind this. I gestured toward Leora's intelligence files. Look at the evidence. We're on our own here. The argument was interrupted by a new sound, the deep, resonant tone of the facility's final warning system. A computerized voice echoed through the corridors. Automated lockdown initiated. All personnel report to designated shelter areas. External communication systems will be severed in T-10 minutes. Myra's face went white. They're cutting us off completely. Once that lockdown engages, I won't be able to reach the servers at all. The radiation shielding will block any remote access. I looked at the three people who'd become the only family I had left in this nightmare. Dorian, still bound by rules that were getting people killed. Leora, carrying the weight of classified knowledge that might save us all. And Mira, willing to risk everything to stop the faction's next phase. There's something else, Leora said quietly. The intelligence files show that Phase 3 isn't just about nuclear strikes. They're planning to blame the attacks on a foreign nation, probably North Korea or Iran. Create a pretext for full-scale war while they maintain control of our response capabilities. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. Not only were they planning to kill Americans, but they were going to use those deaths to justify a war that would kill millions more. The unknown faction wasn't just ending our sovereignty, they were hijacking it. T-8 minutes to lockdown, the computer announced. Mira was already moving toward the equipment locker, pulling out a radiation detector and emergency gear. I'm going, with or without permission. Mira, wait. I started, but she cut me off. No, Axton. You trained me to think like a soldier. Well, soldiers don't abandon their posts when people are dying. She clipped the detector to her belt and grabbed a toolkit. Besides, someone needs to be here to coordinate with the outside world if we manage to reestablish communication. She was right, and I hated her for it. Of the four of us, she was the only one with the technical expertise to stop this. Dorian was too focused on protocol, Leora was intelligence, not engineering, and I was communications, useful for coordinating but useless for the kind of hardware-level work this required. I'll go with her, I said, but Mira shook her head again. You're needed here. If I can cut their access, you'll need to coordinate with any surviving facilities. Get word out about what's really happening. She paused at the door to the restricted section, looking back at us. And if something goes wrong, you'll need to make sure the truth gets out. Promise me that. I wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but the countdown was at 6 minutes and falling. I promise. Mira nodded once, then turned to the sealed door. She entered her authorization code, and the heavy barrier began to slide open with a hydraulic hiss. The Geiger counter on her belt immediately began clicking. Not dangerously high, but enough to confirm our fears about contamination. T-5 minutes to lockdown. As she disappeared into the restricted section, I turned to Leora. Can you patch me into any surviving communication networks? If Mira succeeds, I need to be ready to transmit everything we've learned. I can try, but most of the military networks are compromised. We might need to use civilian channels, radio, internet, anything that's not part of the official infrastructure. Dorian finally seemed to understand the gravity of our situation. If you're right about this conspiracy, if I've been following orders from the people responsible. He trailed off, the weight of his potential complicity settling on him. "Then we fix it," I said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Through the sealed door, I could hear Mira working, the sound of panels being opened, tools being used, the occasional beep of diagnostic equipment. The Geiger counter's clicking had increased slightly, but not enough to suggest immediate danger. T-3 minutes to lockdown. Leora's fingers flew across her keyboard as she worked to establish contact with the outside world. "I'm getting through to some civilian networks. If we can document what's happening here, upload the intelligence files." "Do it," I said. "Everything we have. Names, organizational charts, communication intercepts. Even if they kill us, someone needs to know the truth." The sound from the restricted section changed. Less mechanical work, more frantic activity. Then Myra's voice crackled through the intercom. "I found it. The main server cluster has been completely compromised. They've installed hardware that's been routing all our communications through their systems. But I can isolate it." "What do you need?" I called back. "Time and luck. This is going to require shutting down the entire network, physically removing the compromised hardware, and rebuilding the connections from scratch. It'll take at least 20 minutes. T-2 minutes to lockdown." My heart sank. Once the lockdown engaged, we'd be completely cut off. Even if Mira succeeded in stopping the faction's network access, we wouldn't be able to coordinate with anyone else or get word out about what we discovered. "There's another option," Leora said quietly. "I can override the lockdown system. Buy us more time." "How?" "Emergency override codes. But using them will trigger a full alert to strategic command, including any compromised elements still in the system. They'll know exactly where we are and what we're doing." So our choice was simple. Let the lockdown engage and hope Mira could fix everything while we remained isolated, or expose ourselves to the very people we were trying to stop. T-1 minute to lockdown. "Do it," I said. "Override the lockdown. If they're going to come for us, let them come. At least we'll go down fighting." Leora's hands hesitated over the keyboard for just a moment. Then she began entering the override codes. "Once I do this, there's no going back. They'll know we're onto them. Then we'd better make sure we succeed." As the final seconds ticked down, I made my peace with the choices that had led us here. We were about to declare war on our own system, betting everything on the hope that we could expose the conspiracy before it destroyed us. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we were finally fighting back. The lockdown timer reached 0, then stopped. Leora's override had worked. We were still connected to the outside world, but we'd also just painted the biggest target possible on our backs. Now everything depended on Mira, working alone in a contaminated room, trying to save a country that might not even know it needed saving. And somewhere out there, the unknown faction was preparing for their final phase, knowing that we were the only ones left who could stop them. The emergency klaxon's wail echoed through the facility's corridors as I sprinted toward the primary communications array. Myra's voice crackled through my earpiece, static-laden and urgent. "Axton, I've traced the source. It's coming from level B3, the secure transmission room. But the biometric locks are still active. Whoever's doing this has legitimate access." My blood ran cold. Level B3 housed our most classified equipment, accessible only to personnel with alpha-level clearance. The same level where Dorian had unrestricted access, and where he'd been conspicuously absent from the command center. "Mira, where's Dorian now?" I demanded, taking the stairs 3 at a time. "He left the command center 23 minutes ago. Said he was conducting a final systems check before the all-clear." Her voice dropped. "Axton, that's exactly how long it takes to initialize the Prometheus protocol. 20 minutes. Enough time to reach B3 and initiate the final phase of whatever nightmare we'd stumbled into. I thought of Leora's warning about the faction's infiltration, her desperate insistence that the threat was coming from within our own walls. We'd been so focused on external enemies that we'd ignored the Viper in our midst. The B3 corridor stretched before me, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. My boots echoed against the concrete as I approached the secure transmission room. Through the reinforced window, I could see Dorian hunched over the primary console, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced precision. I tried the door. Locked. "Dorian!" I shouted, pounding on the reinforced steel. "Open this door." He looked up, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never witnessed in 15 years of service under his command. Fear. Not the professional concern of a commander facing a crisis, but raw, personal terror. "I can't do that, Axton," he said through the intercom, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "Then explain it to me." I pressed my palm against the bioscanner, praying my clearance would override the lockdown. The scanner beeped negative. "The faction, the sovereignty message. It's you, isn't it?" Dorian's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Faction? There is no faction, Axton. There's just me, and the weight of knowing what our government has planned for its own people." The transmission equipment behind him hummed with activity, displays showing targeting coordinates I recognized with growing horror. Not foreign cities, not enemy installations, American population centers. Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Jesus Christ, Dorian. What have you done? What I had to do. He turned back to the console, his shoulders sagging under an invisible burden. Operation Tabula Rasa. Complete societal reset. The Joint Chiefs authorized it 3 months ago. A controlled nuclear exchange to justify martial law, eliminate domestic opposition, and rebuild from the ashes. I've been feeding them false intelligence, telling them the strikes were foreign in origin. My mind reeled. You're talking about murdering millions of people. I'm talking about preventing the murder of millions more. He spun around, his face flushed with desperate conviction. Do you know what the real plan was? 12 major cities, Axton. 12. Blamed on a manufactured terrorist cell to justify the complete suspension of the Constitution. At least my way, only 3 cities burn, and the blame falls on a fictional enemy rather than our own citizens. The console behind him chimed ominously. A new display materialized. Prometheus Protocol. Final authorization required. Launch sequence initiates in 4:37. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The Prometheus Protocol, I'd heard whispers of it in classified briefings, but never seen it active. An automated nuclear response system designed to operate independently once activated, immune to external interference or last-minute changes of heart. There has to be another way, I said, my voice cracking. Call it off. All of it. I can't. He showed me his hands. They were shaking violently. The authorization codes are biometric locked to my DNA. Once I input the final sequence, the system becomes autonomous. Even if I wanted to stop it, I couldn't. Then don't input the sequence. If I don't, the original tabula rasa sequence automatically engages at 0800 hours. His voice broke. 12 cities instead of 3. 40 million dead instead of 8 million. The system was designed with no abort function, Axton. Either I choose the targets or the computer does. For 12 flashed on the screen. I stepped back from the door, my training taking over. Mira, I need you to access the emergency power grid. Can you isolate power to level B3, not without potentially damaging the quantum processors? But Axton, her voice sharpened with realization. If the Prometheus system loses power during final authorization, it defaults to safe mode. Complete system lockdown. For how long? Permanently. The quantum encryption keys would be corrupted beyond recovery. 401. Through the window, I watched Dorian's finger hover over the final authorization key. His face was streaked with tears, but his hand was steady now. The trembling had stopped. "I'm sorry, Axton," he whispered. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I closed my eyes and made the hardest decision of my career. Mira cut the power. Level B3 only. "Axton, are you certain? This will permanently disable the Prometheus protocol." "Do it now." The lights in the secure room died instantly, plunging Dorian into darkness. The console's displays flickered once, then went black. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, but the quantum processors had already begun their fail-safe shutdown sequence. Behind me, rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. Leora's voice called out, "Axton, the Joint Chiefs just issued a facility-wide stand-down order. All Prometheus-related activities are suspended pending investigation." I stared through the window at Dorian, who sat motionless in the dim emergency lighting. The weight of what we'd just prevented and what we'd sacrificed settled on my shoulders. "The power interruption," I said slowly. "It didn't just stop his sequence. It triggered a facility-wide security alert." Leora nodded grimly. "The Joint Chiefs are treating this as a potential security breach. They're launching a full investigation into the Prometheus protocol. Someone leaked information about tabula rasa to force their hand." Through the intercom, Dorian's voice was steady now. "I've been documenting everything for months, Axton. Every authorization, every target list, every classified briefing. It's all uploaded to a secure server with automated release protocols." Through the intercom, Dorian's voice was steady now. "I've been documenting everything for months, Axton. Every authorization, every target list, every classified briefing. The moment I failed to input the final sequence, it triggered an automatic data release to congressional oversight committees." "You planned this," I realized. "The power failure, the investigation, you orchestrated all of it." I needed a way to ensure the truth came out without being labeled a traitor. His voice carried the weight of months of planning. The Prometheus protocol was designed to be unstoppable, but every system has vulnerabilities. I just had to find the right pressure point. "You didn't," I said. "Nobody dies today, but you need to unlock this door, and you need to tell me everything. All of it." The lock disengaged with a soft click. When I entered the room, Dorian was slumped in his chair, looking like he'd aged 20 years in the past hour. "There are files," he said without looking up. "Everything's documented. The authorization codes, the target lists, the cover stories. It's all there." "We'll need those files," Leora said from the doorway. "And we'll need you to testify." Dorian nodded slowly. "I know. I've been preparing for this moment since I first learned about the operation. I never imagined it would come to this." Outside, the facility's emergency systems were slowly coming back online. In a few hours, investigators would arrive to examine the cyber attack that had supposedly threatened our nuclear arsenal. They would find evidence of foreign interference, carefully planted by a man who'd spent months preparing for this exact scenario. The official report would detail a critical security vulnerability discovered in the Prometheus protocol, a vulnerability that could have been exploited by foreign agents to launch unauthorized nuclear strikes. There would be congressional hearings, system overhauls, and new safeguards to prevent such breaches. But in the classified annexes, investigators would find Dorian's meticulously documented evidence of Operation Tabula Rasa. The target lists, authorization codes, and recorded conversations that proved the conspiracy reached the highest levels of government. Justice would be served, but quietly, through courts-martial and forced resignations rather than public trials. As I helped Dorian to his feet, I caught sight of the now-dark display screen. The targeting coordinates were gone, replaced by a simple message: system offline, quantum encryption corrupted, 12 cities, 40 million lives, all saved by a power outage and a commander who'd spent months preparing for this exact moment. What happens now? I asked. Dorian straightened his shoulders, some of his old authority returning. Now we make sure this never happens again. We expose the operation, consequences be damned. The files will speak for themselves. Dorian straightened his shoulders, some of his old authority returning. Now we face the music. The congressional committees have everything they need to dismantle the program and prosecute the architects. It won't be clean, and it won't be quick, but justice will be served. And us, we're the ones who prevented a nuclear holocaust. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much but held no regret. History will remember us as the personnel who discovered and prevented a catastrophic security breach. The truth about what we really stopped will remain classified, but the people responsible will face consequences. The facility's main lighting flickered back to life, casting harsh shadows across the walls. In the distance, I could hear the sound of approaching helicopters, congressional investigators and military prosecutors arriving to examine what would officially be recorded as a critical vulnerability in our nuclear command systems. As I walked toward the sound, I realized that today's victory would be measured not in glory or recognition, but in the simple fact that 12 cities would see another sunrise. The truth would emerge, but slowly, carefully, through proper channels rather than catastrophic revelation. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it had to be.